at you, always pretending to be an innocent girl. Do you think I don't know what you're doing? Must you always pretend like you're better than everyone? Because you passed university and found one small boyfriend, you now think you're the queen of Unwa. Don't call me your sister. I hate that word coming from your mouth. You've always been the favorite. Everyone sees your face and forgets I exist. Even mommy and daddy. Everything is always Ifeyinwa this, Ifeyinwa that. It makes me sick.
Unwa was a beautiful village in the Igbo heartland of southeastern Nigeria. It was a place of red earth roads, tall palm trees, and friendly neighbors who knew one another by name. In this community, everyone lived simply and worked hard on their farms or in their small shops. The air often smelled of wood smoke from cooking fires and the sweet scent of ripe fruit from nearby orchards. The village had a peaceful rhythm, marked by the crowing of roosters at dawn and the distant chatter of children playing in the afternoons. It was in this serene setting that two twin sisters, Ifeatu and Ifeyinwa, were born and raised by their loving parents. Early morning in Unwa village, with red earth road and villagers beginning their daily chores. Mazi Onyeka and his wife, Nne Akudo, were proud and hard-working parents. They lived in a modest compound with mud brick walls and a rusted corrugated metal roof, typical of the homes in Unwa. The compound was surrounded by banana trees and neat rows of cassava and yam plants that the family cultivated behind the house. As respected members of the community, the parents taught their children the values of kindness, respect for elders, and honesty. The family didn't have much money, but they were content with the little they had, making up for material things with love and strong cultural values. The twin girls, Ifeatu and Ifeyinwa, were the joy of their parents' lives. Though they were born just minutes apart, the two sisters could not have been more different in personality. Ifeatu, the elder twin by a few minutes, was a sturdy girl with a sharp tongue and a fiery temper. Even as a child, she was bold and often stubborn. Ifeatu liked to have her way, and whenever things didn't go as she wanted, she wasn't afraid to throw a tantrum. Her parents affectionately called her Nwa, meaning child of the lion in Igbo, because of her fierce and fearless nature. Ifeyinwa, on the other hand, was gentle and calm. She had a quiet demeanor that drew people to her. Unlike her sister's stormy presence, Ifeyinwa was like a cool breeze on a hot day. She was slender, with bright eyes and a shy smile. Villagers often remarked that Ifeyinwa had an old soul because she was so patient and kind, even from a young age. She would help her mother fetch water from the stream without complaining and sit by her father's side as he told folk stories under the moonlight. Her parents gave her the nickname Nneka, meaning Mother is Supreme, for her nurturing and caring attitude toward everyone around her. Growing up, the twins were inseparable in a physical sense. They shared the same room and did chores side by side, but emotionally, a rift slowly formed between them. Relatives and neighbors loved to compare the two girls, as people often do with twins. They look so alike, but act so different. One neighbor, Mama Chinyere, would say as she watched them play in the yard. Indeed, the girls did share similar features. Both had the same round face, smooth dark skin, and bright brown eyes. However, their expressions set them apart. Ifeyinwa's face usually carried a soft, welcoming look, while Ifeatu's eyes often flashed with intense energy or narrowed in a frown. The differences in their personalities became more pronounced once they started primary school. At the local elementary school in Unwa, the twins sat in the same classroom, their wooden desks side by side. Ifeyinwa paid close attention to the teacher, carefully tracing her letters on her slate and letter in her exercise books. Ifeatu, however, would often lose interest and stare out the window or get into mischief by doodling instead of writing. Their teacher, Mrs. Obi, noticed the disparity between them early on. One sunny afternoon in class, Mrs. Obi asked a question about the story they had just read. Ifeyinwa's hand shot up immediately, eager to answer. She gave the correct response in a soft but confident voice. Mrs. Obi smiled and said, "Excellent answer, Ifeyinwa. You are such a smart and attentive girl." The class applauded politely. Ifeatu, sitting right next to her twin, crossed her arms and sank into her seat with a deep frown. A few classmates glanced over, knowing that Ifeatu hadn't even read the story. Feeling embarrassed and jealous, Ifeatu scowled at her sister, as if it were Ifeyinwa's fault that she hadn't known the answer. At break time, as the other children ran outside to play, Ifeatu cornered Ifeyinwa by the water pump behind the classroom block. The sunshine fell on them through the leaves of an orange tree as Ifeatu's anger boiled over. "You think you are so smart, eh?" Ifeatu hissed, her small face twisted in anger. Ifeyinwa looked at her twin in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I only answered the question, sister," she replied softly, using the respectful term sister as she often did to address Ifeatu. Ifeatu rolled her eyes. "Stop showing off all the time. You always want to be the best at everything. Why can't you just keep quiet for once? You made me look stupid in front of everyone," she snapped. Tears welled up in Ifeyinwa's eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to show off," she said, voice trembling. She truly felt bad that her answer had upset her sister. Before Ifeyinwa could say more, Ifeatu roughly shoved her against the wall. The metal water pump clanged behind Ifeyinwa's back, and cold water splashed onto their feet. "Just stay out of my way," Ifeatu spat, then turned and stomped off, leaving her twin shaking and alone. This was one of the first clear instances when Ifeatu's jealousy toward her sister turned physical. They were only about 8 years old at the time, but that day's event marked the beginning of a troubled relationship. Ifeyinwa, gentle as she was, did not even tell the teacher or their parents about the shove. She wiped her own tears and continued with her day, hoping her sister would cool off by evening. When their mother, Nne Akudo, found Ifeyinwa quietly sobbing in a corner of their compound later that afternoon, she grew concerned. "Ogini mere, what happened, my daughter?" she asked in Igbo, gently wiping the tears with the end of her wrapper. Ifeyinwa hesitated, not wanting to get her twin into trouble. She shook her head and managed a weak smile. "I fell by the water pump, Mama, but I'm okay now," she lied in a small voice. Nne Akudo knew her daughter was not clumsy. A mother can often sense when something is wrong. She noticed a faint bruise forming on Ifeyinwa's arm. Though suspecting that the twins had quarreled, Nne Akudo didn't press immediately. Instead, that evening, she spoke to her husband about her worries as they sat under the mango tree in their yard. "Nani," she said softly in Igbo, "I'm worried about our daughters. Ifeatu seems to be having a hard time whenever anyone praises Ifeyinwa. Today, I suspect they quarreled again and Ifeyinwa got hot. Mazi Okeke sighed and shook his head. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a deep voice that rumbled when he was upset. Ifeatu is strong-willed, but we must teach her not to let jealousy consume her, he said quietly. He loved both his daughters, and the thought of them hurting each other pained him. That night, the parents decided to have a family talk over dinner. Under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, with a chorus of crickets singing outside, Mazi Onyeka cleared his throat and addressed the twins. Ifeatu and Ifeyinwa sat on a wooden mat on the floor, facing their parents. "We love both of you very much," he began, looking from one daughter to the other. "You are sisters, twins, from the same womb. You must look out for each other, not fight each other. Life will be easier if you support one another." Ifeatu avoided her father's gaze, staring at a spot on the floor and picking at a loose thread on her skirt. Ifeyinwa glanced anxiously at her sister, then back at her parents, nodding slightly at her father's words. Nne Akudo spoke next, her voice gentle but firm. "Ifeatu, my dear, whatever is bothering you, you can talk to us. There is no need to be angry with your sister. She's your only sister, your twin. No matter what, you two should be each other's best friend." For a moment, the only sounds were the crackling of a small cooking fire in the outdoor kitchen and the distant laughter of neighbors' children. Finally, still not meeting anyone's eyes, Ifeatu mumbled, "Yes, Mama," under her breath. Ifeyinwa, hoping things were resolved, scooted closer to her sister and tried to hold her hand, giving it a gentle, hopeful squeeze. But Ifeatu quickly pulled her hand away and stood up. "Are we done here?" Ifeatu asked. Without waiting for a response, she walked to the far end of the room and threw herself onto her mat, turning her back to them. Mazi Onyeka and Nne Akudo exchanged worried glances. They did not want to scold Ifeatu too harshly, thinking this might just be a phase of sibling rivalry. Perhaps they thought with patience and love, Ifeatu would grow out of her jealousy. As the years went by, the pattern unfortunately continued. Ifeyinwa blossomed into a well-behaved, diligent student whom teachers adored and villagers admired. Ifeatu grew more defiant and moody, especially towards her sister. There were times of peaceful between them, moments when the sisters would forget their fights and simply be sisters. For instance, they would both help peel cassava for their mother, sometimes joking and splashing water at each other playfully, or they might team up to chase stubborn goats out of the vegetable garden, dissolving into laughter together when they finally succeeded. In those moments, you could see flashes of genuine affection between the twins, proof that deep down they shared a bond. But it never lasted long. Soon enough, someone would compliment Ifeyinwa on something. "Ah, Ifeyinwa, you have become such a beautiful young lady." Or, "Ifeyinwa, thank you for helping me carry this basket. You are so kind." And Ifeatu would immediately withdraw or find a way to ruin the moment. She might deliberately step on Ifeyinwa's foot while pretending it was an accident, or accidentally spill a cup of water on her just as someone was praising her. These small acts of sabotage became common, and while others noticed and chalked it up to childish mischief, Ifeyinwa understood the bitter truth. Her sister resented her deeply. One notable incident occurred when the girls were about 12 years old during the annual Unwa New Yam Festival, an important cultural celebration in the village. The villagers had gathered in the central square for music, dance, and the ceremonial testing of the first new yams of the harvest. The twins helped their mother carry a large wooden bowl of pounded yam and bitterleaf soup to contribute to the community feast. During the event, the village chairman announced a friendly competition among the children, a storytelling contest. Having learned many folk tales from her father, Ifeyinwa eagerly volunteered to tell a story. When it was her turn, she stepped forward in front of the crowd of villagers and began a captivating tale about the tortoise and the lion, filled with humor and a moral lesson at the end. She spoke clearly and with enthusiasm, using gestures and different voices for the characters. The crowd listened attentively, including many parents and elders who nodded along, impressed by her storytelling skills. When she finished, the villagers clapped and some even cheered. Smiling widely, the village chairman declared Ifeyinwa the winner of the contest. She was called up to receive a small prize, a brand new notebook, and a set of colored pens, valuable items for a schoolgirl who loved to study. Ifeyinwa was beaming as she accepted the prize. Her parents watched with pride. Mazi Onyeka's chest swelled with happiness as he told those around him, "That's my daughter!" Neakudo's eyes glistened with joyful tears. As Ifeyinwa stood there in front of the applauding crowd, glowing with happiness, Ifeatu watched from a few steps away. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. Her face was a mask of envy. In her mind, that should have been her moment in the spotlight. Perhaps she thought she could have been the one telling a thrilling story. She always believed she was just as creative, if not more. But she had been too sullen to volunteer, and now her sister was getting all the praise yet again. Unable to bear it, Ifeatu slipped away during the applause. While the villagers continued with the festivities, she hid behind one of the market stalls at the edge of the square, kicking angrily at the dirt and fighting back tears of frustration. A family friend who noticed her leave informed Neakudo. When Neakudo found her, she was standing alone with a sour expression. "Ifeatu, come back and join the celebration," her mother said gently. "Your sister just did something wonderful." "I'm fine here," Ifeatu muttered, without meeting her mother's eyes. Eventually, after some coercing, Ifeatu trudged back to where the family was seated, arriving just as one of the village women cheerfully said, "Ifeatu, come and congratulate your sister. Oh. Your twin made us all proud today with her storytelling." Ifeatu forced a tight-lipped smile and muttered, "Congratulations," barely looking at Ifeyinwa. But then, she added under her breath in a resentful tone, "Big deal. It was just a silly story anyway." Only Ifeyinwa, who was standing closest, had that last biting comment. She felt a sting in her chest. Despite her own joy, she was hurt that her twin still found a reason to belittle her achievement. Still, she said nothing and simply looked down at the colored pens in her hand, her excitement dimmed by her sister's reaction. Later that evening at home, after the festival, Ifeyinwa tried to make peace with her twin. In their small bedroom, lit by the soft glow of a lantern, Ifeyinwa opened her prized notebook and took out the set of colored pens. She knew that Ifeatu liked drawing and doodling, even if she didn't like studying. Holding out half of the pens, Ifeyinwa said gently, "Sister, look, there are so many colors here. You can take some of them. We can share. You draw so well, and I want you to have this." For a moment, Ifeatu looked at the offering in her sister's hand. Her face was unreadable, and Ifeyinwa waited hopefully for a smile or some sigh that she appreciated the gesture. But instead, in a flash of anger, Ifeatu slapped the pens out of Ifeyinwa's hand. The plastic pens clattered to the floor, a couple of them rolling under the bed. "I don't need your pity," Ifeatu snapped, her voice cold and sharp. "Keep your stupid pride to yourself." Ifeyinwa was stunned, her eyes filled with tears, both from the shock of the slap and the hurt of her sister's words. I wasn't pitying you. I just thought," she stammered. But Ifeatu had already turned away. She grabbed a pillow from the bed and stormed out of the room. Moments later, Ifeyinwa heard the back door of the house creak open and then slam shut. Ifeatu had gone outside, likely to sit in the dark yard by herself and stew in her anger. This painful cycle of Ifeyinwa extending kindness and Ifeatu rejecting it continued throughout their childhood. Ifeyinwa often felt like she was walking on eggshells around her twin, never sure what might spark the next outburst. Despite everything, Ifeyinwa's love for her sister remained. She kept hoping that one day Ifeatu would overcome the anger in her heart and that they could be close like they were when they were little. Their parents did their best to address the situation each time it flared up. Sometimes they scolded Ifeatu or gave her a light punishment when she did something especially cruel or dangerous. For example, when the girls were 13, one Sunday morning as the family was leaving for church, a neighbor complimented how pretty Ifeyinwa looked in her neatly pressed dress. The next moment, out of nowhere, Ifeatu gave Ifeyinwa a hard shove into a muddy puddle by the roadside, spattering her clean dress with brown mud. Ifeyinwa gasped and burst into tears, the dress ruined and her nails scraped from the fall. That day, the infuriated Mazi Onyeka dragged Ifeatu back into the compound. He rarely believed in using heavy punishment, but this time he made her kneel on the hard ground in the courtyard while he fetched a thin cane. He swatted her backside twice, not too hard but firmly enough to sting and drive the lesson home. "You must learn to behave, Ifeatu," he scolded sternly. "This jealousy will lead you to no good end. Look at what you did to your sister." Ifeatu glared at her father with tears of anger in her eyes, but she stayed silent and endured the punishment. Afterward, even though Ifeyinwa was the victim, she was the one who softly asked their father to forgive Ifeatu quickly so they could all go to church. Ifeyinwa changed into another dress and the family went to church late and in a somber mood. Ifeatu never apologized for that incident. She only mumbled sorry when her mother forced her to, and even then it was without any sincerity. By the time the girls entered senior secondary school in a nearby town, Ifeyinwa's reputation as a model student grew even stronger. She consistently scored at the top of her class in exams and was loved by classmates and teachers alike for her humble and helpful nature. Ifeatu, meanwhile, had gained a reputation as a troublemaker at school. She wasn't outright evil. She had her own moments of warmth and even a strange protectiveness toward her sister, but her jealousy often pushed her into misbehavior. Interestingly, on a few rare occasions, Ifeatu showed that deep down she did care about her twin. One afternoon at school, a boy in their class made an inappropriate joke about Ifeyinwa's appearance as she walked by. The comment was rude and it made Ifeyinwa uncomfortable, bringing tears of embarrassment to her eyes. To everyone's surprise, before Ifeyinwa could even respond, Ifeatu was in the boy's face. She grabbed the front of his shirt and glared fiercely at him. "Don't you ever talk about my sister like that again," she sneered. The boy, shocked and a bit scared, stammered an apology. Satisfied that he was sufficiently coiled, Ifeatu released him with a small shove. Later that day, as they walked home, Ifeyinwa whispered to her sister, "Thank you for standing up for me, sister." Ifeatu shrugged as if it was nothing. "Nobody is allowed to insult you except me," she muttered. It was a twisted sort of loyalty, but it was loyalty nonetheless. Ifeyinwa managed a small smile at that moment. taking it as the closest thing to affection that her sister could express. However, moments like this were few and far between. More often, Ifatu's resentment overshadowed any protective feelings she had. She struggled academically in comparison to her sister, and she hated the frequent comparisons. Teachers would lecture her, saying things like, "Ifat, why can't you be more like your sister? She always does her own work and pays attention." Each time she heard such words, it was like pouring fuel on the fire of her envy. To cope with her frustration, Ifat began skipping classes occasionally, especially when she knew there would be tests or when homework was due that she hadn't completed. She fell in with a small group of students who were disinterested in school rules. During class, they would sneak out to the back of the football field to share snacks and gossip. Sometimes, they left the school grounds entirely, wandering around the town, browsing the market, or hanging out at the motor park until it was near closing time for school. Whenever she skipped classes, Ifeatu would urge Ifeyinwa to join her. "Come on, let's go. There's a new movie at the video center, and we can watch it instead of sitting in that boring class," she would whisper to her twin from the desk behind. But Ifeyinwa always refused. She would shake her head and plead, "Please, sister, let's just stay. We have exams coming, and missing lessons will only make it harder. Let's work hard together. We can study later if you want." "Suit yourself, good girl," Ifeatu would sneer in reply, rolling her eyes. Then she would slip out of the class door when the teacher wasn't looking, leaving Ifeyinwa alone, worried and powerless to stop her. As expected, these absences and missing assignments caught up with Ifeatu. By their final year of secondary school, it was clear to everyone that Ifeyinwa was on track to excel in the West African Senior School Certificate Examination (WAEC) that would determine their graduation and university prospects, while Ifeatu was at risk of failing. The twins were now 17 years old. Ifeyinwa, disciplined and focused, spent long hours reviewing her notes and practicing past exam questions. Ifeatu, in contrast, grew even more apathetic, perhaps out of a belief that she couldn't catch up, or maybe a stubborn refusal to ask for help. Their parents, especially Mazi Onyeka, made many attempts to encourage and motivate Ifeatu. He even hired a local university student to tutor her in mathematics and English in the evenings. For a short while, Ifeatu attended these tutoring sessions, but her attitude was far from cooperative. She often arrived late or complained of headaches to cut the lessons short. Sometimes, she simply wouldn't show up, later claiming she had forgotten or that she was helping a friend, excuses no one really believed. One evening, about a month before the final exams, the twins were supposedly studying in their room. Ifeyinwa was fully focused, her notebook open as she memorized biology terms. Ifeatu, however, was lying on her belly on her mat, idly sketching cartoon characters in the margin of an old exercise book. Nnakudo walked in quietly to check on them and found the contrast between her daughters striking. "My daughters," Nnakudo said, offering a warm smile. "How is the studying going?" "Fine, Mama," Ifeyinwa answered, looking up from her book. "I'm reviewing biology and it's going well." "And you, Ifeatu, how is it going?" the mother asked, turning her gaze to the other twin. "I'm fine too," Ifeatu replied quickly, snapping her doodle-filled notebook shut so her mother wouldn't see it. "I've been reading," she added unconvincingly. Nnakudo looked at her with gentle concern. She moved closer and sat on the edge of the bed, placing a loving hand on Ifeatu's shoulder. She said, "Nnem, you know your exams are very soon. These results will shape your next steps in life. We want you to do well so you can achieve great things. You are just as capable as your sister if you put in the effort. Do you need any help with your studies?" "I said I'm fine, Mama," Ifeatu insisted, shrugging off her mother's hand. Her tone was defensive. I will pass, don't worry. A soft sigh escaped Neakudo's lips. She glanced at Ifeyinwa. Please, if your sister needs help, try to explain things to her, okay? Of course, Mama. Ifeyinwa nodded eagerly. She was always willing to help her twin understand a difficult topic or catch up on missed classwork. After their mother left the room, Ifeyinwa gathered up her courage and shuffled closer to Ifat. She was now staring at the ceiling. Sister, Ifeyinwa said kindly, maybe we can go over some math problems together. I found a simpler way to understand quadratic equations. I can show you, and maybe it will help. Ifatu's face hardened immediately. She sat up and fixed a glare on Ifeyinwa. I don't need your help, she said sharply. Ifatu, we can do it together. It might be easier. Ifeyinwa continued, trying to bridge the gap with a smile. I said I don't need you to teach me anything. Ifatu snapped, raising her voice more. I'm not stupid. I can figure it out myself. Just leave me alone, will you? Stung by her tone, Ifeyinwa bit her lips and scooted back. Okay, she whispered, turning her attention back to her books. She didn't dare say another word, and the room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets outside the window. The final exams came and went. During those intense 2 weeks of testing, Ifeyinwa felt confident. She had prepared well and answered questions the best she could. Ifatu, however, felt each exam was like a battle she hadn't trained for. She left many answers blank or guessed randomly. After each exam paper, she avoided her classmates and even her sister, not wanting to discuss how it went. When the results were released online a couple of months later, the twins went with their father to an internet cafe in the town to check their scores. Ifeyinwa's results came first. As the web page loaded and showed her grades, she nearly jumped out of her seat with joy. She had earned distinctions in almost all subjects, A's and B's across the board. She even scored an A1 in mathematics and a B2 in English. It was a spectacular result. Mazi Onyeka's face lit up with pride. Oh, excellent, he exclaimed, hugging Ifeyinwa tightly right there in the cafe, his eyes moist with happy tears. I'm so proud of you, my daughter. You have made us all proud. Thank you, Papa, Ifeyinwa said, grinning. She immediately thought of her mother at home and how happy this news would make her as well. Then, it was time to check Ifatu's result. Ifeyinwa gently placed a hand on her sister's back, trying to silently offer support. Ifatu sat rigidly as her father entered her exam registration details on the website. The screen took a few seconds to load. When the numbers and letters finally appeared, Ifatu's heart dropped. It was as bad as she had feared. She had failed mathematics outright, scoring an F9, the lowest grade. She got an E8 in English, which was also effectively a failing grade since it wasn't high enough for admission. In other subjects, there were a couple of D7s and C6 passes, but barely. Only in one subject, Igbo language, did she manage a credit A, B3. In summary, she hadn't passed enough score subject to qualify for a university admission, or even to confidently say she graduated with good standing. A heavy silence fell. Mazi Onyeka's proud smile from moments ago faded into an expression of shock and disappointment. He didn't know what to say. He gently uttered, "We'll figure something out." But before he could finish, tears of anger and shame sprang into Ifatu's eyes. "I don't care!" Ifatu yelled suddenly, startling the few other people in the cafe. She shot up from her seat, nearly knocking over the chair. Without another word, she bolted out of the cafe door and ran down the street. "Wait! Ifatu!" Ifeyinwa called, running after her. But Mazi Onyeka held his daughter's arm. "Let her go," he said quietly, his voice strained. "She needs to cool off. We'll talk at home." They found Ifatu back at the house later, but she had locked herself in the twins' bedroom. She refused to come out or speak to anyone. They could hear her sobbing angrily through the door. Neakudo sat outside the door, pleading gently. "Ifatu, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. We can try again. Please open the door, my daughter. We are not mad at you. We just want to talk." But there was no response beyond the sounds of crying. It took several hours, but eventually, past midnight, a tired and distraught Ifat emerged. Her eyes were swollen and red. She crept into the kitchen to drink some water, thinking everyone else had gone to bed. But she found her father sitting there in the dark, waiting up for her. He looked at his daughter, who had always been so headstrong. In that moment, she looked almost like a little girl again, lost and hurting. "Come sit," he said softly, patting the bench next to him. Reluctantly, Ifat sat down. She refused to meet his gaze, staring at the cup in her hands instead. "My daughter," Mazi Onyeka began quietly, "I know you must feel terrible. I'm not happy with your results, that's true. But I want you to know that I believe you are not a failure. You just lost your way a bit." Ifat sniffled, not responding. "We can arrange for you to try again," he continued. "You can retake the exams next year. Many people do that and they improve. You just have to put in more effort. We will support you." At this, Ifat did look at him, anger flashing in her tear-filled eyes. "So, I can be more like Ifeyinwa, right? That's what everyone wants. Try again and maybe this time I'll be a little more like her," she said bitterly. Mazi Onyeka was taken aback. "No, I want you to do it for yourself. It's not about your sister." But Ifat stood up, her emotions swinging back to fury. "I don't want to talk about it," she declared. Before her father could say another thing, she marched out of the kitchen and went back to the bedroom, slamming the door. That night, resentment weighed heavier on her heart than ever. Life, however, did not stand still. Ifeyinwa's excellent exam results quickly led to new opportunities. With encouragement from her teachers, she applied for a national scholarship that was awarded to the top students in the state. Only a handful of students would earn it, and it would cover all expenses for university. Given her top-tier scores and glowing recommendations, everyone expected her to be chosen. Within a few months, a formal letter arrived in the mail. It was from Scholarship Board, congratulating Ifeyinwa on being awarded a prestigious scholarship to study at one of Nigeria's best universities. In fact, she had gained admission to study computer science at the University of Lagos, a top university in the country, and the scholarship would cover her tuition, housing, and even a stipend for living expenses. It was the dream of any hardworking student. The day the letter came, their home was filled with celebration. Mazi Onyeka was so overjoyed that he decided to celebrate immediately. He went into their chicken coop and picked the fattest hen, slaughtering it to prepare a special meal. Nnakudo cooked jollof rice and fried plantains to go with the chicken stew. They invited a few neighbors and relatives over to share in the feast and congratulate Ifeyinwa. All evening, the house echoed with praise and laughter. Neighbors clapped Ifeyinwa on the back, saying things like, "We knew it! We knew you would make us all proud," and "Our own professor in the making." Some even teased Mazi Onyeka Nnakudo, saying, "Get ready, your daughter will soon be a big Lagos girl." The pride and joy in the air were unmistakable. In the middle of this celebration, Ifat sat quietly on a stool in a corner of the living room, her face dark and stormy. Every word of praise for her twin was like a thorn pricking her heart. No one had said anything to her beyond a polite, awkward greeting. In fact, some neighbors didn't even acknowledge her presence, focused as they were on the star of the day, Ifeyinwa. A few people tried to be considerate by saying things like, "Don't worry, Ifat will find her way too. Not everyone's path is the same." But those words fell hollow and pitying to her. As the evening wore on, the pain inside Ifat turned into pure bitterness. She could hardly swallow the food she ate. It all tasted like dust to her, while anger churned in her stomach. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she slipped away from the merriment. None of the guests noticed her leaving. They were too busy singing the praises of the scholarship girl. Ifat went out to the backyard and sat on a low wooden bench under the guava tree. The sky was clear and full of stars. but she felt only darkness in her mood. Her mind raced with unpleasant thoughts. Ifeyinwa this, Ifeyinwa that, always Ifeyinwa, she muttered under her breath. What about me? Don't I matter? They are all acting like I don't exist. In her heart, she knew her parents still loved her, but it didn't feel that way. In the heat of the moment, it felt like everyone only cared about her twin and that she was just a useless extra. As night settled deeper and the guests left, the family eventually went to sleep. But sleep did not come easily to Ifat. She lay on her mat, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. In the faint light of the moon through the window, the room they shared looked ghostly. Ifeyinwa was asleep nearby, her breathing slow and steady, undoubtedly dreaming of the bright future ahead of her in Lagos. Ifato's thoughts were far from peaceful. They were like a swarm of stinging bees, each one an envious or angry motion that wouldn't let her rest. How could she bear it when Ifeyinwa went up to university, leaving her behind? People will keep comparing them, she thought. The twin in university and the twin who failed. They would say. The idea made her stomach twist. She imagined the looks of pity or the gossips at the market shaking their heads about poor Onyeka's other daughter. Around midnight, as the village grew quiet and even cricket seemed to calm, a dangerous idea took root in Ifato's mind. The scholarship was the key to Ifeyinwa's bright future. If somehow it went away, maybe things would become more equal again. Maybe then, at least, she wouldn't have to watch her sister sail away into a life of success while she remained stuck. It was an awful thought. She knew it deep down, but jealousy was eating at her, clouding her judgment. Quietly, Ifatu sat up. She remembered that earlier in the day, her father had told Ifeyinwa to send a formal acceptance email to confirm the scholarship. Her sister had done so using their father's smartphone with his guidance, since they needed to reply promptly. Ifatu had been in the room at the time, sulking in a corner, but she paid attention. She also noticed that after sending the acceptance, her father placed the phone on the shelf in the living room to charge and then got busy with preparations for the celebration. Now, with everyone asleep, that phone was likely still there. The house was dark and silent. Ifatu could hear her own heart beating as she quietly stood up and crept out of the bedroom. She knew exactly where her father kept the phone. Sure enough, on the small wooden shelf near the TV, the phone was lying connected to a charger. The screen's soft glow indicated it was fully charged. Ifatu's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. She navigated to the email application, the same one where earlier that day an email had been sent to the scholarship board. It wasn't hard to find the email thread with the scholarship coordinator's address. It was right at the top, still open from before. Taking a deep breath, she began typing a new email to that address, doing her best to sound formal like her sister would. In the message, she firstly stated that this was Ifeyinwa and that she had decided to decline scholarship due to personal family reasons. She wrote that she was grateful for the offer, but would not be able to accept it and apologized for any inconveniences. Each word felt heavy, and a part of her couldn't believe what she was doing, but she pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and spite. After reviewing the short, disastrous email, Ifatu hesitated only for a second. Then with a firm tap, she hit send. The whistling sound that followed made her heart lurch. It was done. The scholarship office would see that email in the morning, and they would think Ifeyinwa no longer wanted the scholarship or the admission. For a moment, a wave of panic and guilt crashed over her. What if they found out it was her? What if she had just ruined her sister's life? She could picture the heartbreak on Ifeyinwa's face, the disappointment on her parents' faces. Fear almost made her wish she could undo the action. Pull the email back out of the digital phone, but it was too late. To steady herself, she clutched the phone tightly. It's better this way, she whispered to herself, trying to justify the unjustifiable. I can't just sit and watch her get everything while I get nothing. It's her fault too. She made it look so easy to be perfect. She knew these thoughts were irrational, that her sister had worked extremely hard for what she earned, but envy has a way of twisting the truth. Quickly and quietly, she placed the phone back on the shelf and tiptoed to her room. Ifeyinwa was still fast asleep, unaware of the cruel act that had just taken place. Lying down on her mat, Ifeatu pulled her thin blanket over herself and squeezed her eyes shut. Her heart was still pounding and her hands felt cold. It took a long time for her to drift into a fitful sleep. The next morning, the sun rose bright and cheerful, bellying the storm that was about to hit the family. After washing up, the first thing Ifeyinwa did was grab their father's phone to check for any new messages from the university or scholarship board. She had been excitedly awaiting a confirmation of her enrollment and details about orientation. She opened the email app, and at the top of the inbox, there was it, a reply from the scholarship coordinator. But as she read the email, her eyes grew wide in horror. The email expressed regret at her decision to decline the scholarship and confirmed that, per her request, the scholarship had been withdrawn and her admission cancelled. It also politely noted that the opportunity would be given to another candidate. I don't understand, Ifeyinwa whispered, her voice shaking. Her hands began to tremble as she stared at the screen. Nne Akudo, who was nearby folding laundry, noticed her daughter's distress. Ife? Ogini, what is it? She asked, coming closer. By now, tears had pooled in Ifeyinwa's eyes. Mama, they said I declined the scholarship, Ifeyinwa managed to say, her voice breaking. She handed the phone to her mother with the email open. Nne Akudo read the message, her face contorting in confusion and alarm. What? Declined? How? We didn't decline anything, she exclaimed. By this time, Mazi Onyeka had joined them, and so had Ifeatu. Drawn by her mother's raised voice, Ifeatu tried to look casual, though her stomach was doing flips and her palms were sweaty. She prayed silently that no one would think of her. It says here that the recipient, meaning you, Ifeyinwa, sent them an email last night to cancel the scholarship, Nne Akudo said, barely able to believe the words as she spoke them. But you were asleep last night, weren't you? And why on earth would you cancel it? She looked at her daughter in bewilderment. I didn't cancel it, Mama. I would never do that, Ifeyinwa cried out, fresh tears streaming down her face. This scholarship means everything to me, to us. I was sleeping. I didn't send any email beside the acceptance yesterday. I promise. I know, my dear. I know, Nne Akudo said, pulling her daughter into a hug as she started to sob. We all know you wouldn't do this. Something is very wrong here. Mazi Onyeka's face turned dark with anger, yet he spoke calmly, trying to think through the possibilities. Let me see that, he said, taking the phone. He read the email carefully, then checked the sent folder for the supposed declining message. It was there, time-stamped around midnight. He thought about who had access to the phone. It had been left charging in the living room. His eyes slowly lifted and fell on Ifeatu, who was standing by the doorway. She had been quiet during this exchange. In fact, she hadn't said a word yet. The look on her face was hard to read, but there was definitely anxiety there. Ifeatu, he said in a slow, controlled tone, as if reining his temper by a thread. Do you know anything about this? Did you see or touch my phone last night? At the mention of her name, everyone's attention turned to the older twin. Ifeyinwa looked at her sister with sudden realization dawning in her tear-filled eyes, as if a puzzle piece had just clicked, but she didn't want to believe it. Ifeatu's heart skipped a bit, but she crossed her arms and scoffed. Me? How would I know anything about it? She replied, trying to sound offended, but her voice was shaky. I was asleep in our room all night. Nne Akudo's eyes narrowed. She knew all her daughter's tales, and she could see guilt flashing briefly on Ifeatu's face before it was masked with defiance. We were all asleep, except you, perhaps, the mother said quietly, recalling that she had heard a noise in the night, but had assumed it was one of the goats outside. Ifeyinwa stepped out of her mother's embrace, a look of disbelief on her face. She took a shaky step toward her sister. Ifeatu, please, tell me you didn't, she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. Ifeatu felt cornered and reacted the only way she knew how to, angrily. Why are you all looking at me like that? She shouted. her voice high-pitched. You think I did something? Why? Just because I'm not the perfect child? You always blame me for everything. We didn't say you did it, Mazi Onyeka said sternly. But if you know anything, you better speak now. This is serious. Your sister's entire future is on the line. Under the intense gaze of her parents and the wounded, pleading eyes of her sister, Ifatu's remaining resolve crumbled. She suddenly felt an overwhelming mix of anger and guilt, and the injustice she perceived against herself. Before she could think, the words stumbled out like a dam breaking. Yes, it was me, she shouted, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. I sent the email. I cancelled the stupid scholarship. Gasps filled the air. It was as if time stood still for a second. You, what? Nyakudo cried, stepping back as if struck. I knew it, Mazi Onyeka growled, grief and rage contorting his features. God have mercy. What have you done, this child? Ifeyinwa felt like the ground had opened beneath her. She had suspected deep down, but hearing her sister admit it was a punch to the gut. Tears streamed down her face. She asked, why? Ifatu, why would you do that to me? Ifatu was breathing hard, her face twisted in a bitter mix of anger and tears. Because I can't stand it anymore, she yelled. Watching you get everything, praise, love, opportunities, everything good, and I get nothing but scolding and disappointment. You think it's fun being the failure next to you? That's not true. Ifeyinwa wept, shaking her head. Mama and Papa love us both. We are twins. We are supposed to support each other, not envy each other. Love us both equally? Ifat snared through her tears. Don't fool yourself, Ifeyinwa. They all love you. The whole village loves you. And they just tolerate me, the bad egg of the family. I'm tired of it. By now, the commotion had drawn a couple of neighbors to the door, peeking in with concern. Mazi Onyeka rarely lost his temper, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He advanced on Ifatu, his hand raised. Ifatu, have you gone mad? How could you do such a wicked thing to your own sister? Before he could strike her, Nyakudo grabbed his arm. Nani Biko, she begged him. Please control your anger. She was shaking, whether from anger or fear or both. It was hard to tell. Ifatu, defiant moments ago, now felt a silver of fear. She had never seen her father so enraged. She backed away. She turned and ran into the bedroom she shared with her sister. Mazi Onyeka followed, grabbing the cane he kept by the door, a thin long branch from a guava tree, reserved for serious punishment. In the main living area, Nyakudo held the sobbing Ifeyinwa, tears running down her own cheeks, as the sounds of thrashing and yeps came from the bedroom. That day, the beating that Mazi Onyeka gave Ifatu was one none of them would forget. He struck her backside and legs several times while shouting, "This will teach you, evil child. How dare you destroy your sister's chance at a better life?" Neighbors outside winced at the sound, and one elderly man who was close to the family stepped in gently. "Onyeka Biko, Ozugo, please, that's enough. She's still your child." It was only when the neighbor pulled him back that the father stopped. He threw the cane aside, breathing heavily, and stormed out of the room, past the neighbor and out in the compound yard to cool off, hands on his head in despair. Inside the bedroom, Ifat lay on the floor, sobbing both from pain and fury. Her pride was shattered, but so was whatever lingering warmth she might have had. She felt only a burning hatred at that moment towards her father for beating her, towards her mother for not stopping him sooner, and especially towards Ifeyinwa, whom she irrationally blamed for it all. After things calmed a bit, Nyakudo approached the door of the room. She saw her daughter curled up on the floor, quietly crying. In a trembling voice, the mother said, "Pack your things, Ifatu." Ifatu looked up, confused and still sniffing. "What?" she managed to say. "You heard me," Nyakudo said, her tone now cold and tired. "Pack some clothes. You will go to Lagos to stay with your uncle Chike for a while. We cannot have you here right now, not after what you have done." Uncle Chike was her father's younger brother who lived in Lagos. the bustling city. He had visited them once or twice over the years. The idea of being sent away suddenly hit Ifat hard. "You are sending me away?" she asked in a small voice, feeling a mix of shock and a twinge of fear. Despite her anger, Unwa was home. Lagos was a faraway place she barely knew. Her mother sighed, tears in her eyes but resolve in her voice. "Yes, maybe a change of environment and discipline from your uncle will help you. Because we have tried our best here and he have paid us back with heartbreak. We can't trust you right now, not after you deliberately ruined your sister's future." Her voice cracked on the last word and she turned away to wipe tears. Within the next few days, arrangements were made. Uncle Chike, upon hearing the situation, agreed to take Ifat in for some time. He was a trader in Lagos running a spare parts shop and he had a small family of his own. He had space in his home and assured his brother that he would keep a close eye on his wayward niece. The morning that Ifat was to leave, she barely spoke a word. She had a small, battered suitcase that her mother helped her pack with her clothes and a few belongings. Ifeyinwa stood by, her face full of sorrow and lingering shock. She had barely slept, and no one had yet figured out how to fix the scholarship situation. They had sent frantic emails and even made calls to the scholarship board explaining that the cancellation was a mistake. But bureaucracy moved slowly and it was unclear if they could reverse what had happened. As a car arrived, one of the neighbors with a taxi had been hired to drive Ifat to the nearest motor park where she would catch a bus to Lagos. The family gathered. Mazi Onyeka refused to come out of the house. He couldn't bear to see his daughter off in anger. Nne Akudo walked with Ifat to the car. Before she got in, Ifeyinwa approached her, tears in her eyes. "Sister," she said softly. She reached out and took Ifatu's hand. I forgive you," she whispered. "Please just promise me you will take care of yourself and make us proud someday." Ifat looked at her twin, seeing only the face of the sibling she had tormented and now grievously wronged. For a brief moment, guilt and sorrow flickered in her heart. She squeezed her sister's hand and something that sounded like "I'm sorry" escaped her lips. So quietly, it was barely audible. It wasn't clear even to Ifeyinwa if she had imagined it. Then, as quickly as it came, Ifatu's moment of vulnerability vanished. She let go of Ifeyinwa's hand and climbed into the waiting car without looking back. Nne Akudo shut the door and tapped the roof, signaling the driver to go. Dust kicked up as the taxi drove off. Nne Akudo and Ifeyinwa stood watch until it disappeared down the red road, both of them silently praying this would somehow lead to a positive change. Ifeyinwa felt a hollowness in her chest. Despite all the pain her sister had caused, seeing her leave was heartbreaking. She returned to the house and sank onto her bed in the now half-empty room, the weight of uncertainty heavy upon her. Little did any of them know, this was only the beginning of a much more journey for both sisters, one that would test the limits of family, forgiveness, and the bonds between twins. Unwa was far behind her when Ifatu stepped off the stuffy commercial bus into the bustle of Lagos. The journey took a full day. When 17-year-old Ifatu arrived at the busy motor park, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The air was thick with humidity and exhaust fumes. Loud voices shouted in Yoruba, Igbo, and other languages as hawkers wove through the crowds, selling everything from sachet of water to roasted plantains. Yellow minibuses, danfos, honked their horns, and throngs of people pushed in every direction. Ifatu's senses were immediately overwhelmed by the noise and sheer size of the city. Waiting for her near the entrance of the motor park was her uncle Chike. He was a solidly built man in his early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and alert eyes. Spotting his niece among the disembarking passengers, he raised a hand and called out, "Ifatu, over here!" Clutching her small suitcase, Ifatu wove her way through the crowd towards him. "Good evening, uncle," she greeted quietly when she reached him, trying to mask her uncertainty with a polite tone. Uncle Chike gave a curt nod and managed a small smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Lagos," he said. There was an awkward pause. The last time he had seen Ifeatu was 2 years ago at a family gathering. She had been a festive but basically polite girl then. Now, knowing the trouble that brought her here, he regarded her with a mix of concern and resolve. "Let's go. The car is this way," he said, leading her to where he had parked his old Toyota sedan. As they left the motor park, the chaos of Lagos traffic swallowed them. Cars and yellow minibuses jammed the roads as people darted across street. From the back seat, Ifeatu stared out the window, wide-eyed. They drove past endless rows of shops and roadside stalls, selling everything imaginable. Women balancing baskets on their heads weaved through stopped traffic, and street boys knocked on car windows trying to sell chewing gum or phone chargers. The noise of honking horns, the calls of street vendors, and the rumble of hundreds of engines created a constant roar. Uncle Chike noticed her expression in the rearview mirror. "It's a lot to take in, eh?" he commented. "Yes, uncle," Ifeatu replied, nearly whispering. She didn't want to admit that it excited and scared her in equal measure. Part of her felt intimidated by the sheer energy of Lagos. Another part of her felt a strange thrill that matched the anger and restlessness she always carried inside. They eventually turned down a busy road in a neighborhood called Mushi, where her uncle lived. The area was crowded and a bit run down, with narrow streets lined by closely packed buildings. Many of the buildings were old, paint peeling, with shops on the ground floors and apartments above. The smell of frying meat and spices wafted from a food vendor's store on the corner. Children in school uniforms ran up and down the street, and a group of young men sat on a stoop chatting in pidgin English. Uncle Chike's car pulled into a gated compound with two modest apartments facing each other. They parked, and he helped carry her suitcase up a flight of stairs to his flat inside. The apartment was small but tidy. The living room had a sofa, a fan that wailed noisily from the ceiling, and a TV perched on a wooden stand. Auntie Ifeoma, his wife, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. She was a petite woman with a serious face that softened when she saw her niece. "Welcome, Ifeatu," she greeted her, offering a brief hug. "How was your journey?" "It was fine, Auntie," Ifeatu said politely. A young boy of 5 peeked out from behind his mother. This was their son, Chibuzo. He looked at the new visitor curiously. "Greet your cousin," Auntie Ifeoma instructed him. The child shyly said, "Good afternoon, sister." "Good afternoon," Ifeatu responded, forcing a small smile for him. They settled in and gave her a quick tour of the flat. There were 2 bedrooms. One belonged to uncle and auntie, and the little boy, and the other, usually used for storage and guests, had been cleared out for Ifeatu to use. It was much smaller than the room she shared back home with her sister. Just enough space for a foam mattress on the floor, a small wardrobe, and a tiny window overlooking the busy street. As evening fell, they had a simple dinner of rice and fish stew. Conversation was minimal. Auntie Ifeoma tried to ask about Unwa and the family, but the weight of why Ifeatu was here hung in the air. Finally, Uncle Chike cleared his throat and addressed it directly. "You know why you have come to stay with us, don't you, Ifeatu?" he asked, looking across the table at his niece. "Yes, uncle," she replied, her eyes downcast towards her plate. She poked at a grain of rice with her fork. Her uncle nodded slowly. "Good. Your father entrusted me with you because he believes a change of environment and some discipline will help you. I intend to do my best to set you on the right path. But understand this, I will not tolerate the kind of behavior you showed back home. In Lagos, you must be careful. This city can swallow a person up if they go astray." "I understand," she mumbled. Auntie Ifeoma chimed in gently. "We want you to succeed, dear. We will treat you like our own daughter while you are here, but you must behave like one. Respect the rules of our house and focus on improving yourself, okay?" "Yes, Auntie," Ifeatu said softly. She felt a mix of emotions, shame at the lecture, but also a spark of defiance deep inside. That night, on a thin mattress in the unfamiliar dark of Lagos, she cried quietly. She cried out of homesickness for her family. Even though things had been bad, it was still home. Out of frustration at herself and her situation, and out of fear of this huge city and expectations placed on her. But as she wiped her tears, she reminded herself that she wouldn't be here forever. Maybe she could prove to everyone she wasn't hopeless, and then she could return home triumphantly. Or so she fantasized briefly. Soon anger crept back in, and she instead thought of how she was sent away because of Unwa. That thought hardened her heart once more. In the following weeks, Lagos life took on a routine for Ifat. Uncle Chike ran a spare parts shop in a market, and he left early every morning, often not returning until evening. Auntie Ifeoma worked part-time as a seamstress from home, sewing clothes for neighbors and church members. She also cared for little Chibuzo, who was lively and often underfoot. During the day, after helping with some house chores, Ifat was mostly left with free time. At first, she felt restless and bored. She didn't know anyone in this neighborhood. Now and then, she would sit on the balcony and watch the goings-on in the streets below. The women haggling with vegetable seller, young men pushing carts of goods, the call of a man sharpening knives offering his services. It was noisy, but there was a kind of energy that she found intriguing. A couple of weeks after her arrival, Uncle Chike called her to the living room one evening. "Sit down, we need to discuss your education," he said. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I have spoken to your father, and we agreed that you should retake your secondary school exams," he explained. "The GCE exam is coming up in a few months for private candidates. We will register you for it so you can try to get the necessary credits. Without those, you can't move forward academically." If there was one thing in the world Ifat did not want to face again, it was exams. The shame of failing still stung. She frowned and muttered, "Must I? Maybe I can learn a trade or something." But her uncle raised a hand to stop her. "First, you will get your basic right. If you want to learn a trade, having your secondary education certificate is important these days. Besides, you are certainly smart enough to pass if you actually study. I won't hear otherwise." "Yes, uncle," she murmured. Arguing was pointless. She could see the firmness in his eyes. He went on to outline her new schedule. He had arranged for her to join an evening lesson group at a teacher's house down the street, where other students were also preparing for GCE. She would attend lessons in math, English, and a couple of other subjects every weekday afternoon. In the mornings, she was expected to study at home and help her aunt. Reluctantly, Ifat found herself back in the world of textbooks and notebooks. Each afternoon, she trudged a few blocks away to Mr. Ade's cramped sitting room, which she had converted into a makeshift tutorial center. A handful of other teenagers and young adults sat on benches, fanning themselves against the heat, as the tutor went over past exam questions scribbled on a standing blackboard. From the start, Ifat had a chip on her shoulder. She felt these lessons were a waste of time. Her pride was still wounded from failing before, and instead of trying harder, she often mentally checked out during the sessions. While Mr. Ade explained math formulas, her eyes would drift to the window, watching the neighbors' kids play football in the alley. When asked to read a passage for English comprehension, she would mumble through it, barely paying attention to the content. The other students in the class varied. Some were earnest learners, others as disinterested as she was. One of them, a girl named Bola, noticed Ifatu's boredom and befriended her. Bola was a local girl who had also failed her exams once and was trying again, more because her parents forced her to than her own ambition. During breaks, they would sit outside on a low wall, sharing bottles of orange Fanta and chatting. Before long, Bola introduced her to a couple of her friends in the area. These new acquaintances were not exactly studious types. Often, after the lesson, instead of going straight home, Bola would convince Ifat to come hang out at a nearby arcade where teens played video games and snooker. There, they met up with Bola's boyfriend, a lanky boy everyone called Wheezy, and his crew. They weren't dangerous criminals or anything, just rowdy neighborhood youth who skipped school or had dropped out. In their company, Ifeatu started feeling a sense of belonging. No one scolded her or compared her to anyone here. They laughed loudly, made edgy jokes, and for once, she could forget the expectations weighing on her. The downside was that her evening return home drew later and later. Auntie Foma would often be waiting on the balcony, worry etched on her face. "Where have you been, young lady?" she asked one day when a supposed 2-hour lesson turned into 5 hours out of the house. I stayed to practice some past questions with a friend," Ifeatu lied. Her aunt looked unconvinced. "Please don't make this a habit. Lagos is not Unwa. It's not safe to roam around, especially after dark. Go tomorrow, straight to lessons and straight back home. Understood?" "Yes, ma." For a short while, she tried to obey, but the pull of her new friends was strong. It felt liberating to rebel a little in this new environment where her uncle and aunt's watch wasn't as constant as her parents. She found excuses to slip away. Sometimes, she claimed the tutor extended the class or said she was going to the library, when in truth, she wouldn't even know where the local library was. As the GCE exam drew nearer, Uncle Chike sat her down again. He stressed how important it was for her to pass this time. He even took a few days off from his shop to quiz her and help with revision. Under his direct eye, she would grudgingly study, but when he wasn't there, her books remained mostly unopened. When the exam week came, she went through the motions of sitting for each paper in a crowded hall of other private candidates. As she waited for the results over the next couple of months, deep down, she feared the worst because she knew she hadn't prepared well. Yet, outwardly, she pretended not to care. During this period, life continued around her. Back in Unwa, her parents and sister had started to heal from the turmoil of her departure. With Ifeatu gone, a peaceful calm returned to Onyeka's household. Ifeyinwa, after the shock and heartbreak of losing her scholarship, found support from her school principal and community. They rallied to help her find an alternative path to university. Thanks to her excellent results, she secured admission to a reputable university in a neighboring state. It wasn't the University of Lagos as initially planned, but it was a good school where she could study biology. Her second choice, of course, since this disruption cost her the slot in computer science. Although no full scholarship was available, a local education board grant and some financial help from relatives assured that tuition was covered. So, about 6 months after Ifeatu had left for Lagos, Ifeyinwa too left home. Though, under very different circumstances, the family bid her a proud farewell as she went to live in the university's hostel, stepping into the bright future she had earned. In her new campus environment, Ifeyinwa thrived. She missed home and even missed her twin, despite everything. But she poured herself into studies and adapted to university life. She made a few friends, girls who appreciated her kind and humble nature. Often in the evenings, she would sit on her bunk in the dormitory and write letters to her parents, updating them about her courses, her roommates, and little anecdotes about campus life. Every letter included a hope that her sister was doing well. Ifeyinwa hadn't heard directly from Ifeatu. The one time she tried calling Uncle Chike's phone to speak to her, she was told by her uncle that your sister is fine, she's resting. And then, politely discouraged from calling frequently. She suspected that either Ifeatu didn't want to talk to her or the situation wasn't great, but she had no details. Indeed, as time passed in Lagos, things were not going great for Ifeatu. The GCE result eventually came out. One afternoon, Uncle Chike returned from work with a printed copy of her score sheet. The look on his face told the story before he even handed it to her. She had failed again, perhaps even worse than the first time. Only a couple of subjects had passing marks. Critical ones, like math and English, were once more below requirement. The verdict was clear. She did not have the results needed to graduate successfully or proceed to uni. When the news reached Unwa, Mazi Onyeka's hopes for her academic turnaround were dashed. After discussing with his wife and a phone call with his brother Chike, Uncle Chike decided on a new approach. Maybe academics aren't her path right now. He considered to them, we can enroll her in a skills program. At least she can learn something practical. So, it was a month later, much to Ifatu's relief, she was signed up at a local vocational training center. The center offered courses in various trades like tailoring, catering, hairdressing, and computer studies. Considering her aunt was a seamstress and could guide her practice at home, they enrolled her in the tailoring course. On the first day of the program, Auntie Former accompanied Ifatu to the center. The tailoring class had about 10 students, mostly young women and a couple of young men, seated at sewing machines in a hall with colorful fabrics stacked against the walls. The instructor, Mr. Hassan, was a middle-aged tailor with years of experience and a no-nonsense demeanor. He welcomed the new student politely and assured the aunt that if the girl worked hard, she could acquire a useful skill. Initially, learning a skill was a welcome change for Ifatu. Using her hands felt more engaging than filing out papers. She learned how to thread a sewing machine, how to take measurements, and practice stitching straight lines on scraps of clothes. She wasn't naturally patient, and sewing required patience. Still, for the first couple of weeks, she made an effort, partly to avoid the disappointment of yet another failure, and partly because it was a relief not to be studying textbooks. However, her ingrained habits soon resurfaced. At the training center, some of her classmates were serious and punctual, but a few were like her, inclined to slack off. She gravitated towards a pair of girls, Amaka and Bisi, who often skipped the theory portion of the class to gossip behind the building or take extra long lunch breaks. With them, he found the camaraderie she enjoyed, laughing at jokes, making fun of the stricter students, and occasionally mocking Mr. Hassan's constant reminders to focus on your work. It didn't take long for her record at the center to become spotty. She began arriving late frequently, often blaming the notorious Lagos traffic or saying she wasn't feeling well. When present, she paid only partial attention. Once, when she asked to cut a pattern for a skirt, she lazily eyeballed the measurement instead of using the tape properly, ruining the fabric. Mr. Hassan scolded her in front of the class. Ifatu, if you won't take this seriously, you are wasting everyone's time, including your own. She felt humiliated by the public reprimand and responded with a muttered sorry, sir. But inside her, resentment grew. Who was he to talk to her like that? She thought he was being too harsh over a simple mistake. The breaking point came one day, sweltering afternoon, when the power was out, as often happened, and the fans in the hall had stopped, making everyone irritable. Mr. Hassan assigned them a project to sew a simple blouse. Frustrated with the heat and the assignment, which she barely understood due to missed lessons, Ifa had to slide out of her seat and headed for the door. Where are you going? Mr. Hassan called out, noticing her attempt to slip away. I need fresh air, she snapped. Come back and finish your work, he said sternly. Fresh air can wait. Defiantly, Ifata retorted. It's too hot in here. I can't concentrate. She continued toward the exit. The instructor, fed up with her attitude by now, followed her to the doorway. If you walk out now, don't bother coming back, he threatened, trying to keep his voice low, not to disturb the others. Though several were already watching. Anger flared in her. The authority figures in her life were always giving ultimatums, always threatening. Before she could think, she whirled around and shouted, Then I won't come back. Who cares? This place is useless anyway. Shocked gasps came from a few classmates. Mr. Hassan's eyes widened. How dare you speak to me like that? He backed. He reached out as if to pull her back inside by the arm. But in a reflex, Ifatu shoved him with both hands. It wasn't a hard push, but it caught the man off balance and he stumbled backward, bumping into a table. A sewing machine rattled and nearly fell off. The whole class froze. For a moment, even Ifatu was surprised at herself. Mr. Hassan steadied himself, and an ugly scowl twisted his face. Get out, he hissed, pointing outside. You are expelled. Out! Breathing hard, heart racing from the adrenaline, Ifatu grabbed her bag from her chair and left without another word. She could feel all eyes on her, a mix of astonishment and disapproval, and she stormed out onto the street, tears of fury and humiliation burned in her eyes. She kicked out a pebble on the side of the road, sending it scattering into a gutter. By the time she reached home, Auntie Ifeoma had already received a call from the center about what happened. She stood in the living room with arms folded tightly across her chest. "What is this I hear, Ifeatu?" she asked, voice heavy with disappointment. "You fought your instructor?" "I didn't fight him," Ifeatu snapped defensively. "He was being unreasonable and he grabbed me first." "He said you pushed him and disrespected him," her aunt said. "Even if he was strict. Is that how to behave? This is an opportunity you have thrown away." "You don't understand, Auntie," Ifeatu retorted, pacing the small space angrily. "None of you understand. I hate it here. I hate doing this. I hate being bossed around like I'm some child. I'm not good at these stupid things they keep forcing me to do." Her voice cracked, revealing a mix of anger and despair that had been building in her. At that moment, Uncle Chike walked in, having hurried back from his shop after his wife called him. He looked at his niece with a stern face. "Go and pack your things," he said coldly. Both Auntie and Ifeatu looked at him in surprise. "Chike, what do you mean?" his wife asked. "I mean she cannot stay under my roof if she will continue like this," he replied, rubbing his temples as if nursing a headache. "I will call my brother and tell him I will be bringing her back. I have tried my best. I enrolled her in lessons, gave her a home, put her in skills programs, and yet..." He threw his hands up in frustration. "You are sending me back?" Ifeatu asked, a tremor in her voice. Despite all her anger, the idea of being sent away from Lagos, her new taste of freedom, was terrifying. "Yes, tomorrow morning, first thing, we will go to the bus park," he said flatly. "I'm sorry, but we cannot handle this anymore. Not when you show no respect or effort." That night was tense and silent. Auntie Ifeoma barely spoke a word to her. The disappointment was palpable. Ifeatu packed a small suitcase with some clothes and personal items. Deep down, fear mixed with her anger. Fear of going home in shame, of facing her parents and the village after failing yet again. Early the next morning, Uncle Chike drove Ifeatu to the main motor park where she had catch a bus back east. The ride to the park was mostly silent. As he packed and helped load her suitcase onto the bus, he spoke more softly. "Ifeatu, I hope you will learn from all this someday. We only wanted to help you." She didn't reply, staring at the ground. Her ticket was purchased, her bag stowed, and soon she was on a bus headed back home to Unwa. The city skyline faded from view as the vehicle joined the long highway out of Lagos. By evening, the bus arrived at the dusty junction near Unwa. Stepping out, Ifeatu saw her father's familiar figure waiting by his motorcycle. He had ridden out to meet her. As soon as she approached, he looked her up and down, perhaps searching for some sign of change, but she was the same, if anything thinner and harder in expression. They did not hug. "Get on," was all Mazi Onyeka said. She climbed onto the back of the motorcycle and they headed home. The ride took about 20 minutes, through the now familiar green countryside and onto the village roads. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. It was a scene that might have been beautiful, but neither father nor daughter had eyes for it at that moment. At home, Nne Akudo stood by the gate, worry etched on her face. When they entered the compound, she approached and gently touched her daughter's arm. "Welcome, my child," she said quietly. Ifeatu only nodded slightly. Inside, dinner had been kept ready, a porridge of yam and vegetables. Though the mood to enjoy it was absent, they sat down as a family for the first time in nearly a year, but the silence was heavy and strained. Finally, Mazi Onyeka cleared his throat. "We got a full account from your uncle," he said, looking straight at Ifeatu across the table. "It seems things did not go well in Lagos." The understatement hung in the air. Ifeatu stared at her plate. "It wasn't a good place for me," she mumbled bitterly. "It wasn't a good place for you, or you refused to make it good?" Nne Akudo asked, pain and disappointment evident in her voice. "Ifeatu, do you realize how many people have tried to help you, and how many chances you have wasted? Your uncle and aunt We, your parents, even your sister, wanted to help your study. What else were we to do? Ifeatu felt cornered. She hadn't expected a warm welcome, but facing their disappointment was harder than she thought. Why are you all looking at me? I didn't do anything, she lashed out suddenly, even as her eyes filled. Why do you always think the worst of me? Her defensive anger only confirmed what her parents feared, that she had learned nothing. Unwa, who had been quietly observing her sister with hurt and confusion, spoke up softly. Sister, we are all hoping you would be better. We missed you. Please. Ifeatu, Mazi Onyeka said, his tone turning pleading. Enough of this anger. We love you. We want you to succeed. But you have to want it for yourself. Look at your sister. Ifeatu interrupted with a sharp, bitter laugh. Yes, look at her, the perfect daughter. She glared at Unwa, top of her class. The pride of the family. You know, being compared to her every single day of my life. Maybe that's why I hate it here. The word hate hung in the air and made everyone flinch. Nakudo's eyes filled with tears. Ifeatu, we have never compared. Yes, you have. Everyone has. Ifeatu snapped, breathing shakily. All I ever hear is Unwa this, Unwa that. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of feeling like I'm never good enough in this house, in this village. Unwa looked stricken. I never wanted you to feel that way. I'm sorry if... Stop apologizing. Ifeatu shouted, her voice echoing against the walls. She stood up, her chair scraping the floor. Just stop. I don't want to hear it. I wish I wasn't even part of this family. Nakudo gasped softly, pressing a hand on her chest. Mazi Onyeka's face turned grim and sad. Unwa began to cry quietly. Without another word, Ifeatu stalked off to the small room she once shared with her sister, leaving her family at the table in stunning silence. They heard the door slam. In this hush that followed, Nakudo dabbed her eyes. What do we do now? She whispered to her husband. She felt as though their daughter had returned even more of a stranger. Mazi Onyeka reached out and squeezed his wife's hand. He had no answers. We pray, he said tiredly, and we keep trying. She's our daughter, but I fear for her. Unwa wiped her tears. Mama, Papa, maybe she will calm down after a few days. It must hurt her to come back like this. Ever forgiving, she was already seeking ways to excuse Ifeatu's outburst. We can only hope, Nakudo replied softly, patting Unwa's shoulder. Over the next several days, Ifeatu remained distant. She helped with chores, only when directly ordered, and spent much of her time loitering with a few idle youths in the village. Without school or work, she drifted. Mazi Onyeka tried to involve her in farm work, but she showed little interest. Nakudo, after witnessing that disastrous dinner, mostly prayed and kept out of her way to avoid another explosion. Ifeatu began smoking cigarettes with her new village friends behind the abandoned old mill. She learned to curse in harsh slang and would sometimes come home late in the evening, reeking of tobacco. Eyes flashing defiance if her parents questioned her. One night, during an argument over her whereabouts, she yelled at her father, I hate you! I hate all of you! And ran out again, leaving the household in tears. It became clear that being back in Unwa, rather than softening Ifeatu, had made her even more volatile. The Onyeka family walked on eggshells around their eldest twin, hoping not to trigger her wrath, but also deeply worried what trouble she might cause next. Despite all this, the years began to roll by. Unwa was excelling at uni. She came home during semester breaks, and the house would brim with life as she shared stories of campus with her delighted parents. Ifeatu usually stayed out of sight during those visits, either out of jealousy or disinterest. When Unwa did see her, she always greeted her kindly and tried to chat, but Ifeatu would respond with one word or snide remarks before slipping away. By her final year, Unwa was at the top of her class, collecting awards and poised for a bright career. In those years, she also found love meeting a young man named Ekene during a joint campus seminar between several universities. Ekene was a driven, intelligent student who was starting a small tech company with friends. The two hit it off, and soon they were inseparable. Ifeyinwa's letters to her parents began to include mentions of Ekene, how respectful and kind he was, how he made her laugh, how he had big dreams and a good heart. Back in Unwa, Mazi Onyeka and Nne Akudo were overjoyed to hear that their good daughter had found a worthy partner. They could sense in her writing how happy she was. At the same time, their pride in Ifeyinwa was tempered by quiet, constant sadness whenever they remembered their other daughter's choices. Ifatu had not improved. If anything, she had become more hardened. By age 20, she was known in the village as a troublemaker. There were incidents, a shouting match with a market woman who accused her of stealing mangoes, a fist fight with a local boy who teased her. That further tarnished her reputation. She scoffed at the idea of returning to school or learning a trade. Mazi Onyeka and Nne Akudo had tried to arrange small apprenticeships for her with local businesses. A tailor in town, a caterer, but she either refused outright or quit after a week, calling it nonsense work. Having run out of ideas, they simply prayed for her, hoping that with time she might mature and see the error of her ways. Ifatu's simmering resentment towards her family only grew in that period. She saw how eagerly her parents awaited Ifeyinwa's letters or calls, how they saved money to send to Ifeyinwa at school, how they spoke with pride to anyone who would listen about their daughter, the soon-to-be graduate. Meanwhile, Ifatu felt like a ghost in the house, present but unseen, except when causing trouble. And trouble, at least, got her some attention, even if it was negative. By the time Ifeyinwa graduated from university with top honors, the contrast between the sisters was stark. Ifeyinwa was now a poised young woman of 22, with a degree in biology and a promising future. Ekene, who had graduated a year earlier and grown his tech startup into a successful small company, proposed to Ifeyinwa at her convocation. She said yes, tears of joy in her eyes as friends cheered around them. News of the engagement and the plan for a visit home reached Unwa ahead of the couple. Mazi Onyeka and Nne Akudo were beside themselves with happiness. Their daughter was coming home, not only as a graduate but with a fiancé who would soon formally ask for her hand in marriage. They busied themselves, repainting the parlor, fixing a leaky spot in the roof, and buying a fat goat to butcher for a celebration feast. Ifeyinwa's old room was decorated with new curtains and fresh sheets. The village itself buzzed. Everyone remembered the shy, brilliant Onyeka girl and wanted to see how she had grown. And Ifatu, she watched all these preparations with her arms crossed and an increasingly sour expression. Each nail hammered in the house, each cheerful discussion of Ekene's visit, felt like another reminder that life was moving on without her. Ifatu's own life felt stagnant and empty, while her twin sister's life was blooming with success, love, and promise. The jealousy that had once caused small childhood quarrels was now a raging tempest in her heart.
I see your face in every dream, but your eyes don't smile at me. We came from the same small world, but you fly while I can't breathe. My sister, my shadow. Why do you hate me so? We shared a room, we shared a name, but your heart feels cold as stone. Well, sister, my shadow. Why do you hate me so? We shared a room, we shared a name, but your heart feels cold as stone. You said I took what's yours, but I never asked for more. I only wanted love and peace, not to be the one you were. Will we ever laugh again, or has the damage gone too far? I reach for you, but you pull away and leave me with the scar. My sister, my shadow. Why do you hate me so? We shared a wound, we shared a name, but your heart feels cold as stone. My sister, my shadow. Why do you hate me so? We shared a wound, we shared a name, but your heart feels cold as stone.